Good to be with you this morning. Good morning, everyone. Glad you could join us. I was talking to some people before the service started, saying how, last time I was supposed to speak, we had a level 2 snow emergency. Today, we're supposed to have some more winter weather, so I'm going to have to quit agreeing to speak during the winter months. Seems to be a bad omen here. So before we begin, you'll see a little handout in your bulletin. I don't want to scare you, it's just the teacher and me. Sorry. We're going to be taking a journey together this morning, and may get a little dense. It's one of those things. I'm challenged with it every day when I teach. You know something that you've been studying for, I don't know, probably close to 3 decades now, and it's like, oh yeah, and you start talking about it and everyone else is looking at you like, what? So I do that every day. I teach statistics and math at Columbus State, and I'm kind of used to the during the headlight looks. So I have divided some guided notes. Feel free to use them if you want. If your mind wanders and you get lost, you can probably find some signposts here. But I just kind of wanted to make the way easy for all of us. So I want to begin with a little story. The story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. How many of you are familiar with that story? Good. I was counting on that. So the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden was being carefully explained in the children's Sunday school class. Following the story, the children were asked to draw a picture about the story to share with the class. Bobby drew a picture of a car with 3 people in it. In the front seat was a man, and in the back seat was another man and a woman. The teacher was a little confused by this picture, and so she asked Bobby to explain the picture to the rest of the class. Bobby hopped out of his chair and said, well, this is God driving Adam and Eve out of the garden. So there's much that the story of the Garden of Eden can teach us if we're willing to think outside the box, like Bobby did, and open our minds to metaphors that do not necessarily come from our traditional ways of thinking about this story. How many of you heard this story as a child? I did. And I heard a very common, I think, interpretation that maybe all of you are familiar with as well. Well, this morning, I would like to explore some of these alternative insights contained in this powerful archetypal story and unearth some of the gems it contains for our journey as human beings. Much of what I'm going to share with you about the Garden of Eden can be found in an article written by J. Daniel Moore entitled The Real Meaning of the Garden of Eden. It is not what you think. So let's start at the beginning. God just spent the last 7 days creating all of existence, and he declares that it is good. On the last day of creation, when God creates Adam and Eve, we have the one becoming the 2. And so unity somehow manifests itself in Adam, and then splits into a duality, Adam and Eve, male and female. And the one becomes the 2, which eventually becomes the many, because aren't we all descendants of Adam and Eve? Now we are told that God places Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, a paradise where all of their needs are met, and where they get to commune with God every evening. God tells Adam and Eve that they can eat of any fruit in the tree of the garden, but forbids them to eat of the fruit of the, anyone remember? Tree of knowledge of good and evil, right. Traditionally, we interpret this to mean that Adam and Eve are in a state of purity, of non-duality, of innocence. But let's dig a little deeper. If we switch perspectives a little bit and interpret this story as a metaphor of the human journey that we're all on, the Garden of Eden describes the state of a newborn baby. In developmental psychology, we find that when a baby is born, it has no idea that there's a difference between itself and the rest of the world. It knows nothing of duality, of male and female, of good and evil, of subject and object. This is a state of pure consciousness that's unaware and undifferentiated. For example, when you play peekaboo with a baby, from the baby's perspective, the psychologists tell us, your face literally disappears from existence and then reappears. Pretty scary stuff, really. And no wonder many babies cry at this game when you try to play it with them. So we each start our life's journey in the Garden of Eden, in a state of pure innocence. Each one of us has a preferred perspective of how we perceive this Garden of Eden, this innocent state of undifferentiated consciousness. These 9 perspectives can be mapped out on an Enneagram. So some of you may be wondering, what in the world is an Enneagram? Well, an Enneagram is a 9-pointed figure. It actually also has 9 sides, but the sides overlap, so that's sometimes a little hard to see. That is contained within a circle. And you can see that each point is numbered on the circle. Where each side touches a circle, we have a number listed for that point. This is a kind of cosmic map of the universe, universal process. There's something in there called the law of 7. There's something in there called the law of 3, which tells us how all of the processes, in Unity we would say, how it goes from our divine idea into manifestation in the real world. They explain kind of how that process takes place. That's really dense stuff. We're not going to jump off the cliff this morning. We're going to enter this series of cosmic maps through something that we all have a lot of familiarity with. So talking about the Garden of Eden, how we each kind of perceive that state of undifferentiated innocence and purity and connection. There are holy ideas that we see at each point. And these holy ideas represent 9 different perspectives of this Garden of Eden, of this ultimate reality. Taken together, these perspectives describe the totality of the state of innocence as we as humans are able to perceive it. Although all 9 of these perspectives reside in each one of us, we each have one perspective that we're especially sensitive to. Let's look at a few of these perspectives. When you see reality from this perspective of holy love, which is right up there at the top at point 9, we see that the ultimate nature of all that exists is loving, and that we each are made up of, and that we are each made of and are an expression of this love. When we see reality from the perspective of holy origin at point 4, down in the right corner there, we see that God is the source of all manifestation, including ourselves, and that everything is inseparable from God. When we see reality from the perspective of holy strength, which is at point 6, there on the left side, we see with absolute certainty that our nature is spirit, and that spirit is our inner foundation and true support. The holy idea is just a particular understanding about reality and the human soul. We lose contact with this perspective through the process of conditioning and socialization during early childhood. This event is represented by eating of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in our story. So returning to the story of the Garden of Eden, we learn that after God instructs Adam and Eve that they can eat of any fruit in the garden except the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, visits Eve? Serpent visits Eve, a snake visits Eve, and plants the idea of eating this forbidden fruit. Wait, look at how good it is. Wouldn't that be good to eat? And Eve does so and offers it to Adam. And we're told in this story that their eyes are immediately opened and they realize that they are naked. They lost their sense of oneness with God, and they see themselves as separate individuals, and they feel afraid. So they make themselves clothes out of fig leaves, and they hide in the evening when God comes around to visit with them. And so it goes in our cosmic human journey. When we lose our awareness of oneness with God, when we lose contact with this holy idea that we have about existence and reality, we become afraid. When we experience ourselves as separate from the one, we experience a basic fear. And so we have another Enneagram, the Enneagram of basic fears. And on this Enneagram, you will notice that the loss of each holy idea results in its own unique basic fear. So let's go back and visit the points that we looked at before. At point 9, there on the top, you'll see that when we lose the perspective of holy love, we fear loss and separation. At point 4, which is over on the bottom corner there, when we lose the perspective of holy origin, we experience a deep fear of being without an identity. And at point 6, when we lose the perspective of holy strength, we have a deep fear of being without support and without guidance. So I'd like to recount my own journey to help you understand how this works. As I said before, each one of us begins our journey sensitive to one of the holy ideas. So I'm going to put that back up there. I started my journey from point 1, holy perfection. I did not choose to start my journey from this point. The current theory of the Enneagram teaches us that this starting point is genetically determined. It's part of our DNA. In a state of purity and innocence, I perceived reality through the filter of holy perfection. That is, I saw that the fundamental nature of everything, including myself, is inherently perfect, good, and positive. I was sensitive to the inherent rightness, sacredness, beauty, goodness, and perfection of reality just as it is. However, as I was socialized as a young child and ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, I lost contact with this perspective. I forgot that all that is, including myself, is inherently right, sacred, and perfect just as it is. So this caused my basic fear to arise. Because I lost contact with the perfection of all that is, I experienced a very deep and primordial fear of being corrupt or bad. In other words, I saw that I was naked. And so what did I do? Well, I created a set of clothing. So I created some clothing to hide behind and to protect me. In other words, in psychology, I developed an ego to help me survive as an individual. My ego's agenda is to avoid my basic fear of being corrupt and bad at all costs. And it does this by striving to create my basic desire. So if we look at the Enneagram of basic desires, if you look up at point 1, my basic desire is to be good, in balance, and to have integrity. And again, we see that each point has its own basic desire because of what we feel we've lost connection with. In order to mask what I feel is bad and corrupt in my nature, I strive to be good, in balance, and to have integrity. And this is what I believe will make me okay, will keep me safe in the world. Avoiding my basic fear and creating my basic desire is the ultimate goal of my ego personality. So let's return back to the story of the Garden of Eden. So Adam and Eve have eaten the fruit. They find out they're naked. They make some fig leaves. They're hiding in the bushes, hiding from God. And after eating the forbidden fruit, and God finds them, they're hiding in the bushes. God drives Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden, as Bobby drew the picture of. As I just shared, this represents what happens to each one of us in our unique way when we lose contact with our holy idea. We live with our ego, and we forget that we ever experienced the Garden of Eden. We begin to believe that we are our ego and nothing more. But an ego is just a collection of conditioned habits and mental constructs that are somewhat unconscious until we bring awareness to them. And an ego is important because it helps us to survive as an individual in the formidable world, but it is also just an illusion. It's not who we really are. We create our ego at a very young age. The psychologists tell us we usually create it by the age of 4, if we're psychologically healthy. And so we are very young and inexperienced when we develop these conditioned habits and beliefs about the world. But for a while, they do the job. They protect us. They help us to keep going and look around. All of us have survived well beyond the age of 4. We're intact and we're functioning adults. So our ego helps us through all of this. But as time passes and the Garden of Eden experience dims in our consciousness, we fall into a dangerous trap. We begin to believe that we are only our ego. We're banished from the Garden of Eden. We become imprisoned in our ego, and it becomes our task as a human being to break out of this prison and to return to the Garden of Eden, to return again to who we truly are. Returning to the Garden of Eden with awareness is no easy task. In fact, almost every religion states in its own words, this is the purpose of your journey as a human being. If you recall, God does a curious thing when Adam and Eve are banished from the garden. God places a cherub or an angel with a fiery sword as a guardian to stop anyone from entering the garden. But why would God bother to place a guardian? God could certainly have just obliterated the Garden of Eden. like he did with all of civilization during the time of Noah and the Great Flood. But God chooses not to obliterate the Garden of Eden. Could it be because we are intended to return? The only reason a threshold guardian would be needed is if there's a way back in. Threshold guardians are, by their very nature, supposed to be overcome somehow. Sometimes we overcome them through battle. Other times we overcome them through knowledge. And I propose we use the knowledge of the Enneagram maps that are available to us. So understanding that our ego has been programmed to avoid our basic fear and to create our basic desire gives us a lot of insight into our ego personality. So you will see that the basic fear and the basic desire that you are avoiding and trying to create, because your loss of a basic idea, creates a certain personality type, a certain personality pattern in each one of us. And here we have the enneagrams of the enneagram of the personalities. Again, notice that each point has its own unique ego personality. So using my journey as an example, my ego is programmed to avoid the appearance of imperfection and corruption, and instead desires to be good and in balance and to have integrity. This pattern manifests itself in a personality that can be described as a reformer or a perfectionist. So you see that at point 1. So, on good days, I show up as what we call a reformer. I work very hard to create a more perfect reality, and I care very deeply about that. The problem here is that I am working very hard to create my idea of a perfect reality, not necessarily yours. And many people understandably find this very annoying. On not so good days, my personality shows up as a perfectionist. On those days, you will experience me as someone who is really strict and very hard on myself. And sadly, I expect as much from you as I expect from myself. When you get to know me well, you will sense that there's kind of a simmering frustration, a chronic annoyance and a profound grief just beneath my surface, because I've lost the experience of reality as holy perfection, perfect and right just as it is. Since our ego personality is the outer shell of who we are, of our human psyche, it's the easiest to observe in ourselves. In our workshop this afternoon, if you choose to brave the weather and stay, we will explore this Enneagram at great depth. It is kind of like our entryway into these Enneagram maps, because we can all observe ourselves, or we can ask people who know us well what they see in us, and so we have a kind of connection into, okay, where's my starting point? And then we can kind of start to unweave and unravel a whole lot of things. You'll be given tools to discover what your starting point is, and once you know this, we'll weave our way through the other Enneagrams just as we're doing this morning to see how it all fits together for you. So let me share a recent incident of how the Enneagrams helped me to understand my behavior and gave me an awareness that helped me to choose the right action. I've spoken about my son Kai, I think, several times. My youngest, he's been a challenge. My husband and I often joke, if Kai were our firstborn, there would have only been one. So our firstborn, our daughter Anna, was really easy to raise. She kind of, pretty much raised herself. We thought we were wonderful parents. Then Kai comes along and it's like, okay, this has nothing to do with us. So he's been our challenge, a delightful challenge, and I love him with all my heart. But yeah, some of the gray hair you see, yeah, I attribute it to Kai. So anyway, Kai graduated from the Ohio Fire Academy last December. And a couple of weeks after his graduation, he stopped by the house to elicit my help in writing a resume so he could begin to apply for some jobs as a fireman. So as we sat down to work together at the kitchen table, I noticed that I was really becoming quite agitated. I was aware that I felt an enormous amount of pressure to help Kai write the perfect resume so that he had the best chance of securing a job in a rather competitive profession. As we worked together at the table, I observed that my body was becoming very rigid and tense. I could feel a sense of panic starting to develop. And I remember thinking, what if we can't get this resume right? What if Kai can't find a job? And I immediately felt some resentment as I thought to myself, well, I hope this doesn't ruin the rest of my day. Fortunately, I had the presence of mind to recognize this very, very, very familiar pattern. I experience it almost every time I set out to start something that I don't feel totally competent to do. As I focused on my breath to give myself some space from the emotions that were starting to overwhelm me, I had what I call an aha moment. I realized that it was just my basic fear of being bad and corrupt that was arising. I was reacting to the belief that I wasn't competent at writing resumes for firemen, and that somehow made me bad and corrupt. Whenever we experience our basic fear, our personality is set into motion, sometimes on steroids. I realized what was really playing out in me in that moment of discomfort, and I was just in the battle of avoiding my basic fear of being corrupt and desperately trying to create my basic desire of being good. In that instant, I had that realization. I understood that I was the one who was actually creating my bad day. Kai had absolutely nothing to do with it. And in that moment of realization, I had a little bit of freedom from my ego-conditioned patterns, and I was able to make a choice. I could shut down and become frustrated and resentful, as I often do when I'm on autopilot, or I could appreciate the inherent rightness of that moment, just as it was, with all of its flaws. Thankfully, I chose the latter. Kai and I had a very productive afternoon creating a resume he felt very good about, and as of just a few days ago, he's working as a fireman on Miller Support over on the east side, so it all worked out, as it always does. So this is an example of what I call falling up. Using the knowledge that we have, a lot of it mapped in the Enneagrams to help us understand our egoic illusions, escape from our self-imposed prison so we can transcend to higher levels of conscious awareness. We see this play out in the story of the Garden of Eden. Who was it that told Eve she could not, or that she should eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Remember? The serpent, right? Now, I don't know what you were told, but when I was in Sunday school, I was told that the serpent represented Satan. Many of you are familiar with that spin on things? Yeah. And that he tempted Eve to sin, she fell for it, and she fell down into sin when she ate the fruit, dragged Adam along with her, and, here we are. But it doesn't really seem plausible that the serpent should represent Satan. First of all, the serpent is one of the oldest mythological symbols we know of, and it represents fertility or creative life force. Because snakes shed their skin periodically, they are understood to be symbols of rebirth, transformation, immortality, and healing. In the Gospel of John, Jesus refers to the serpent as a symbol of transformation and rebirth when he makes a direct comparison between raising up the Son of Man on the cross and the act of Moses in raising up the serpent in the wilderness. We read in John 3, verses 14 through 15, "As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life." So the serpent represents the Christ in us, or what we call our higher self. So higher self, represented by the serpent, guides Eve to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. In this interpretation, Eve isn't the villain. She didn't fall into sin. Instead, she's actually fallen up. She is simply fulfilling the role of woman, giving birth to conscious awareness. In closing, I would like to explore one more question. Why are we as human beings programmed to return to the Garden of Eden? We noticed earlier that God chose not to destroy the Garden of Eden after he drove Adam and Eve out of it. Instead, God placed a cherub or an angel with a flaming sword as a threshold guardian. Why? What is it guarding? The garden itself? We understand that the garden represents a state of purity, of undifferentiated consciousness, essentially a state of blissful ignorance. So why would we want to get back in? To relive our younger days when life was simpler? Not quite. Adam and Eve were driven out of the Garden of Eden so they wouldn't eat of the tree, wouldn't eat of the fruit of the tree of life and become like God. The guardian angel is protecting the tree of life. So here's the human journey. Eating the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil caused us to become aware of a separation from the oneness that we call God. But this is only an illusion of separateness. Our ego is not us. It's just a set of conditioned beliefs and habits. In order to get back into the garden, we must see reality for what it truly is, going back to our holy ideas. This is what the Enneagram shows us how to do. When we realize the separation is ultimately an illusion of the senses, and that the only thing that exists is the one that we call God, we also realize that we are no longer separated from the one. In fact, we are the one. And that's what eating the fruit of the tree of life represents. Awakening, liberation, fully aware bliss. I find this very interesting. The tree of life is only mentioned in the Bible narrative, or the biblical narrative, 2 times. The first time is in the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible, in the Garden of Eden. The second time that we read about it is in the book of Revelation, the very last book of the biblical narrative. In the very last chapter of Revelation, we read, "Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing down from the throne of God. On either side of the river is the tree of life, with its 12 kinds of fruit. To everyone who conquers, I will give permission to eat of the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God." And now we've come full circle. From blissful, undifferentiated, unconscious awareness, the Garden of Eden, out into a formidable environment that we experience as a separated individual with a great deal of fear and our ego to protect us, and then back again into the unity of the Garden of Eden. But upon our return to the garden, we see that we have changed. As we read in the book of Revelation, we have conquered. We've conquered what? We've conquered our illusion of separateness. We've conquered our ego. We bring our full awareness with us into the garden when we return, into this pure and differentiated consciousness of being. According to the story, God threw us out of the Garden of Eden so that we would not eat of the tree of life and become like him. But as we see in Revelation, God knew all along that we are already one with him and welcomes us back with open arms. Let's close in a word of prayer.